Hello, friends. Welcome back to Out of Patience. In science, progress isn't just slowed by what we don't know. It's strangled by systemic barriers built on bias, bureaucracy, and buried history. Then there are the gates that guard access, diminish diversity, and dampen discovery. So, when barriers need breaking, we send in Oliver Bogler. Here is the latest dispatch from Season 2 of Standard Deviation. Take it away, Oliver.
We like to think of the laboratory as a sanctuary. It's a place where the outside world falls away. In the lab, it doesn't matter who your parents are or how much money you have or where you grew up. The only thing that matters is the quest for understanding. Dr. Chrystal Starbird knows that this is a lovely idea. You could say this is what got her into science in the first place.
So I think it's natural to be curious, and science kind of embraces that curiosity and fosters it. When I was young, I grew up in a really sort of disadvantaged background. Unfortunately, I had a mom who struggled with addiction, who's a single parent, and we lived in public housing, etc. I found that science was really an escape for me. When I was in sixth grade, actually, one of my mother's drug dealers gave me a box of medical books. And I always kind of joke, I have no idea what the story is behind it and how he got that box of books. And I was like just enthralled. There were a lot of neuroscience books for some reason in that box. I thought, oh my gosh, like the human brain is so fascinating.
Soon science became a refuge for Chrystal in even the most horrific moments.
I had to turn my mom into the police when I was 12 years old. And the day I did that, I went to a pond. So the pond had become like my solace. I loved watching the tadpoles, watching the fish, like imagining all the things that were happening under the surface. And I was there for hours. What really stands out to me about that moment is that science really just became something more than just a subject matter for me at a really young age.
Now Chrystal is an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina. She is a structural biologist studying the shape and function of the smallest building blocks of life and how they are involved in diseases like cancer and Alzheimer's. By every metric, hers is a success story. In 2020, Chrystal won the first Rising Black Scientist Award given by the prestigious journal Cell. Her winning essay described how her view of science has shifted since that day at the pond.
That when I was young, I had this idealized view of science. I thought science is this really welcoming place for anyone that has the talent, the interest, the drive, the intelligence, and I could go there and do amazing things, and it wouldn't matter what my background was, that I was poor. It wouldn't matter about any of those things. When I got into science, I realized that unfortunately, that's not always the case, right? And so that's kind of what I wrote about. It was really hard, for example, to go through graduate school and a postdoc as somebody who didn't have any means.
An example, going to a conference, a coveted opportunity to share your work, get feedback, and above all, network. But here's the snag. Universities reimburse travel expenses afterwards. You have to front the money for flights and hotel. She couldn't, so she missed out. The system failed her, but she did not fail the system.
Sort of developed my interest in advocacy because I had to advocate for myself and say, hey, this is not quite fair. And, what can we do about this? And I, had some success working around things and some not. But I realized that even though science is very objective and we're focused on facts, the practice of science, how it's done, at least in my experience in the United States and academia, is not always as welcoming and clear and factual.
She started by sharing the solutions she developed to the disproportionate barriers she and others were facing. Over time, more and more issues emerged. For example, the underrepresentation of women in seminar programs and the absence of childcare at conferences.
There were just some common themes that were echoed. And I realized that I had become someone who wanted to do something about those things because I was like, oh, some of these seem really easy to solve, right? So why should we all just sit around and several voices are saying the same thing, like we should do something. And so I think at some point my advocating for myself transitioned into wanting to advocate for others and to use the skills that I had gained like to be effective in advocating for myself, for others.
I'm Oliver Bogler. Today on Standard Deviation, the advocacy tax. Like many scientists from underrepresented groups, Chrystal figured out the unwritten rules, fought for access, and then, once inside, held the door open for everyone else. That considerable burden was stacked on top of an already demanding career. It's called the advocacy tax for a reason. Like most taxes in our world, it does not fall equally on all. Chrystal serves as the chair of the board for the Life Sciences Editors Foundation, a nonprofit specifically designed to break down the walls she had to climb. The foundation launched the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Award, JEDI for short, pairing awardees with expert editors and mentors to help them publish and win grants.
One of the two things that distinguish it is the network access that it provides, but also the very specific mentoring plan. What's different about this program is it's like we've identified an exact need. You need a publication that you want to publish, you need a grant that you want to write, and you want to be successful, and we are going to help you exactly with that, right? And so we're going to meet an immediate need that's identified, and in that sense, we can be much more targeted.
At the heart of the JEDI program are its volunteers.
JEDI has been able to get this really amazing group of volunteers from many different journals, very successful editors from Cell, Nature, all different kinds of journals, who are now sitting with people one-on-one and helping them with their work and hearing about their work and getting excited about their work. And I think that access, that networking access, is really unique. There are, unfortunately, in my opinion, definitely in-groups in science. Science is very networking heavy. A lot of times, like pedigree matters, what labs you've been in, who's willing to speak up for you matters. I would say, as somebody, who sees how decisions are made for grants and that kind of thing, sometimes, even in that case, it's all about who's going to advocate for you, right? I would love to say that we're generally driven by just the science alone. And I think the science is very important. We evaluate the science critically, but I don't think that's just what drives us, because we can have, two grants that are very, very interesting scientifically that we think are good. The one that's going to get it is the one that people know, who are in the room advocating for that person.
JEDI was born during a storm, the global pandemic. But do we still need programs like this more than 5 years later?
We are, I think, in this great debate right now where, people are, for example, ending diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And the idea is that they're giving unfair advantages to certain groups. And, to a certain extent, I understand that concern, right? But what I think they're not acknowledging is that access is a real issue in academic spaces. So the assumption is, if you are smart enough, talented enough, motivated enough, driven enough, you will succeed in these environments. You don't need any additional support. And that is absolutely wrong. And I am exactly the person to tell people that that is wrong, because I am intelligent. I've always been a great student, and I've also always worked hard.
So underrepresented scientists need programs like JEDI. But why does science need a diverse community of scientists? Don't we just want what the current system defines as the best?
Oh, I think we do want the best scientists. And to me, that's why diversity is important, right? The fact is, like, if you think those two things are separate, then you might have a belief that people from different cultures and different backgrounds don't have as much value to bring to science, right? The reality is there is value in every population, but the value in having people from different populations in science is that we can figure out the real best questions to answer.
Chrystal takes us back to the start of the pandemic.
And what was happening is people were going to hospitals and they were putting a pulse oximeter on people, and they were using that to determine if someone was like really critical or not in the initial like triage phase, right? The reality is that they've shown that those don't work as well for dark skin. So the question is, who was in the room making these decisions that needs to be the guiding principle for triaging? And there was no one in the room to say, hey, this might not work for people of darker skin. Like, there was no one to ask that question, right? And so to me, the utility of having diversity is when you get all those different viewpoints together, you can really approach problem solving with all the knowledge
Now, Chrystal is keeping the JEDI ship steady in another storm as academic science is dealing with funding disruptions and unprecedented political interference.
There have been so many programs that started around 2020 that have ended recently or grown smaller or put less effort into them because of the current crisis, right? That hasn't happened with JEDI. They're still taking on a few more, actually, awardees every year. They still have a huge pool of volunteers who are willing to help with editing. And so one thing to me that's impactful and unique at this point, maybe sadly, is that they're just keeping on their mission. And they recognize now more than ever how important it is.
The people most passionate about fixing the broken system are usually the ones the system was designed to exclude. They are the ones who stay up late on a Tuesday night to help a stranger navigate a grant application while their own grants are waiting on the desk. I asked Chrystal why she does it.
I don't think it's a burden that's fair, but I also don't think I'm going to wait around, me personally, for things to be fair, for me to be successful and to do what needs to be done, right? So me doing these things is not me saying, I think this is the system we should have, because it's not. But I also don't want to not be here and not be also advocating and doing all these other things. There's definitely attacks. I'm always advocating for some of my work to be recognized, and not just mine, but others like me. Every time I've been in DC, American Council on Education, NIH, any of these decision-making rooms I've been in, I make it a point to always say that people like me who are here today, in addition to our jobs, giving you information, advocating for new science policy, doing all these things, are not being rewarded in any way, shape, or form for this. And I don't mean that give me some money or some reward. What I mean is, for my job, for my tenure, this matters not at all. But this is very important work. I always advocate for the reward structures shifting in academia.
This is why it is a tax. Chrystal has some numbers.
I mentioned, I was invited over 70 times to give talks. I would say about 60% of those are science talks and about 40% are non-science talks. The 40% that are non-science talks, my school, my committee, all of them don't really care about. And it's not that they don't care about it personally, but I'm saying systematically they don't care about it, right? Why is all of that labor erased? That's the advocacy tax, right? But I'm not going to stop doing that, because every time I've gone out, it's impacted people, it's impacted students, it's impacted policy, it's impacted things. So this is work that I'm not going to stop. But why don't we consider that work important in science?
For Chrystal, the JEDI program extends the reach of her advocacy. It ensures that when a brilliant scientist hits an unfair wall, there is someone on the other side with a ladder. But keeping that ladder in place is getting harder. We're living in a moment where the very words diversity, equity, and inclusion have become political targets. The JEDI program has helped over 100 awardees with over 1,000 hours of volunteer effort. It is working. But Chrystal says the model isn't perfect yet, because right now it relies on the extra labor of people like her.
If you asked my close friends and my spouse and my children if the advocacy tax was too much for me, they would say yes already. I work extremely hard. I'm almost always working because of all the things that I agree to do in addition to my real job, because I won't accept failing at my real job. So I just do all of it.
So Chrystal is determined to keep giving talks not on her science, to keep mentoring the students and fellows, and she will keep holding the door open, even though the cost is high.
And it's not just Black women, but I obviously am a Black woman, so I can relate to this, about Black women in academic spaces having a lot of health struggles. We had a couple Black women who are really well known last year that died of heart disease, for example, at a fairly young age. And a lot of that, we don't know their personal stories, but people attribute a lot of it to this extra tax, right? To not only are they excelling in their careers, but they also have to do all this other stuff, right? And this doesn't obviously just apply to Black women, but it's a reality for some of us. And so it is difficult, but I think I'm one of the luckiest people in the world. In reality, I'm doing exactly what I envisioned for myself, and I'm having exactly the kind of impact that I would want to have. And I think there's nothing better in life that you can ask for than that.
This is Oliver Bogler with Standard Deviation on the Out of Patience podcast network. Production of this episode was supported by the Life Science Editors Foundation.